Morning everybody, happy Wednesday and welcome back. Now, today we're going to be talking about when to give up on or move on from a language learning resource. So for this video, I've come up with 3 reasons why you might want to move on from a particular language learning resource. Reason number 1 is that it just doesn't work for you. Now this one's a bit like meeting a person, sometimes you meet someone and they're a nice, good person, but for whatever reason, there just isn't that spark. Sometimes you meet someone and they're just not a good person, and that doesn't work either. But for whatever reason, there's just not that chemistry, there's not that spark, and you just kind of know pretty early this is not really a good match. And for me, it feels very similar when I start a new resource, and unfortunately, that's just the reality. And such an important part of language learning and becoming a very effective language learner over time is learning what works for you and what doesn't, so that hopefully over time you can identify those characteristics very early and then not lose time doing things that you either don't like or that just don't work for you, even if they might work for other people. Reason number 2 is that you like the resource, but it's just not the right time. I think as we're going through our language learning journey, very often we're sort of always on the lookout for new resources, and this is a really good thing. It's good to have a stockpile of things, and it's always nice to have the next thing already queued up so you know what you're gonna do next. And so sometimes we come across a new exciting resource that we know right from the beginning, this is gonna be a great resource. Now, sometimes we know this right from the start, but we're just so excited about it, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just figure this out after we try the resource for a little bit. But oftentimes we realize that it's just not quite the right time. I think most often this means that the resource is a bit too advanced for where we are right now. Number 3, you like it, but you've simply outgrown it. Now, if you've studied a foreign language for any amount of time, you've probably been there. You've been studying a resource, let's say a textbook. It's all going really well until one day you sort of start to notice that you're not really getting as much out of it anymore. Now, you like the textbook, it's a nice textbook, it's a good resource, you like it, you want to keep liking it, but over time you start to notice that it's kind of time to move on. But wait, you had a plan. I mean, and you're 80% done. It would be a shame to give up now. And that's kind of the underlying theme across all 3 of these reasons, is that very often we just keep going long after we really probably should have just moved on to something else. Now, I think part of this is, a lot of us have a bit of a completionist sort of quality to us. It's nice to finish things. It's just like that great feeling of checking something off your to-do list. But when it comes to a language learning resource like a textbook, it's just an amazing feeling to sort of close it and say, I'm done. But the thing is, in language learning, I think it's so important for us to listen to our bodies, listen to our brains, and when you really start to listen, you kind of just know sometimes that it's time to move on. Now, a classic example of this for me is with number 3, which was when you outgrow a resource despite really liking it. Now, many of you might know the textbook Asimil. It's a wonderful book and it's a really great resource for starting out in a new language, and they also have a really nice wide array of language options as well. Now, it's really funny because for me, it's almost like clockwork. Whenever I do Asimil, I always reach a point, and it's right between sort of 90 and 100 lessons where I just know that I'm done. And it's not a bad thing. It's not the problem with Asimil. Actually, I think it's better for a resource to give you a little bit more than you probably need, rather than not giving you enough and you wish it was bigger, you wish it had more to offer you. Now, the first time I experienced this was with French, because after learning Japanese, French was my next language, and that was the first time I was really thinking very critically about my methodology and how I was learning languages, and Asimil was my first serious beginner resource. In fact, I still have that Asimil book. Hang on. Here it is. Oh my God, this is very nostalgic. This is that very first Asimil book. It's got check marks, highlights, it's dog-eared. I went through this thing so many times, probably 2 or 3 times I just went back through it. Not all at once, I tend to go back to beginner resources later on. But so this has 113 lessons, and I remember pretty distinctly that at around, I think it was about 85, 88, 90, I kind of just got this feeling, but it was a bit difficult to identify since I didn't have that much experience yet. But by the time I got to about lesson 95, I just knew, like, it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't that I didn't like the book. I just knew I was dying to move on. I knew that I had everything I needed to go on to the next step in my language learning journey. And like I said, I think that sometimes we really can be stubborn about wanting to finish something because we're so close. I mean, it's only 113 lessons, but that could still be about 20 days or maybe even a whole month of extra study time that you're not dedicating to something else. And so, like I said, I just think it's important for us to learn more about ourselves, learn what works for us and what doesn't work, but also learn to kind of know when it's time to move on and when you're ready to go on to the next exciting step in your language learning journey. Okay, I hope that was helpful for you and some nice food for thought. It's always good to have food for thought on a Wednesday. I think this is a really nice topic to think about. I think it's a really good thing to, over time, become more and more aware of. But I will also say, there is some value to just the nice feeling of completing something. So I would love to hear from you. What do you think? Do you think that, you know, if you're 80%, 85, maybe even 90% through a resource, but you just know that it's time to move on, do you stick with it? Do you want to check it off your list? Do you find that trade-off to be worth it? That wonderful shot of adrenaline, that rush? It's a very real thing, and it's end of the day, staying motivated is important. And so I could see an argument for why you might want to do it, but I still think it's good to move on. But I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? I'll see you back here on Friday for the next episode.